What we wanted to talk about tonight was this concept of brand equity and the extent to which, if a CMO is coming into a new role, or even just within the organization, whoever is overseeing advertising, marketing budgets, they're viewed in many cases as change agents, or they feel an imperative to sort of affect change within their organizations. Yet at the same time, as is with the case with many of you, they might be overseeing that advertising and branding and marketing for a brand with a rich history and a lot of equity behind it. So I think what we want to start with is sort of answering this question of how do you kind of strike that balance between preserving brand equity, kind of isolating it, determining what you need to save, what you need to sort of work to develop and preserve, versus affecting change within your organization. So I'd invite anyone to jump in.
I'll start.
Sure.
Because we just went through this exercise. How do you get stronger than the rock? and it really for us became about repositioning the rock and building from the rock up. So I think when it comes to Prudential, the strength and the history and everything that comes along with the rock is something we wanted to preserve.
How has sort of preserving brand equity, or sort of strengthening it, changed? How has it changed the challenge of?
For us, it's made it more challenging. I mean, at Siemens Enterprise, we're about to go through a major rebranding, and the reason I say it makes it more challenging is because what that brand stands for is very different in different markets, sure. Right? So if you take Germany, for example, absolutely nobody wants to move away from the Siemens brand. But if you come to the United States, people go, okay, we can do something new, we can do something fantastic. So taking that global perspective creates an inherent conflict that in the past you could almost differentiate the brand. You could say, okay, well, we're going to do something a little different in Germany, we'll do something a little differently in Brazil or whatever. Whereas now that's almost impossible.
Because of digital media.
Because I don't say it's impossible, right? It's not that there are differences that don't exist. Yes, there are lots of differences in cultures, regions, all that kind of stuff, but the digital element makes it almost impossible to control how much gets contained versus how much doesn't.
I think the digital has definitely forced us to understand that we don't really own the brand, right? The customer owns the brand, the marketplace owns the brand, and they are defining what's important to them, and how they understand it, and we're keepers of the brand, ambassadors of the brand, and managing that. But there does have to be an organic element, as you say.
You have to, in a sense, let it go, but be extremely aware of what's going down, and when you control it in a non-heavy-handed fashion. We've seen so many. I mean, we can go ad nauseum with the situations where you've seen a bad PR move that started with a tiny little tweet and blows up in your face, and I think we're all aware of the possibilities of that happening with our brands now.
I don't think digital changes who you are as a brand. It just means there's more conversations going on, which actually puts a pressure on you to further define who you are as a brand, what your core values are, what you offer, what you stand for. I mean, that should be something that is stable. It's like being an individual. You don't change, you can evolve, but people are friends with you because of who you are and what you stand for. So it just means more people are open to you, and more people are exposed to you, and more people will interact with you. So it's not just you talking to them, it's them talking to you, but you still remain who you are. So I don't think you should let go of that.
I think there's a different part of digital too. I mean, what is digital anymore, right? I mean, that's social, but print is digital, think iPad. Think TV is digital, think Hulu, right? So I think digital has also opened up amazing new ways for brands to tell their story. I mean, think video. You have the opportunity to use interactive, engaging mechanisms to tell your story, an opportunity that we didn't have before. We had print, static, one-pager, things that couldn't talk back, that didn't have the emotion to it. So I think it's leveraging the power of the medium to tell compelling stories, and then to your point, to really push those equities further along, right?
And I think to that end, if it's positioned correctly, you can actually have your consumers tell your story for you.
So I think the most dangerous weapon in the hands of a CMO is a marker board marker, and only to be only second to the eraser that goes with it.
You've now taken on 90% of my job.
Yeah. And I think what it relates to what we're talking about is that for so long, we whether it's technology or models, we've thought of the way we engage customers and businesses in models and matrices and charts and PowerPoint slides, but to Chris's point, at the end of the day, these brands, as someone mentioned, reside in human beings. And it seems to me that what digital is doing is it's restoring an imperative of humanity. That is
honesty,
and honesty and authenticity and humanity. That if you don't have a why that really matters, it's kind of like game over.
So where do metrics come into play with determining, is there a place for metrics in terms of quantifying, identifying brand equity, and sort of where it can change and where it shouldn't?
Sure. I mean, but it's always snapshots, right? So what I don't look. I mean, so only speaking personally, but a snapshot doesn't mean anything to me. What means something to me is a progression over time. So if you say I've got 10% unaided awareness, I don't know if I'm supposed to jump up and down and go fantastic or whatever, right? Not that that's the metric I would necessarily use, but it's sort of a basic one like that. So it's the progression, and if I can keep pushing it in the right direction, that's when I know I'm making progress. And what it does come back to is the other challenge of CMOs in general. It's not necessarily the topic today, but I would say is the operational element of a CMO, of not the brand, but the results of the business.
I think that change is a tricky word.
Yeah.
Okay, and this idea of change, overwhelming change, disruptive change, and the emotion around changing something that's familiar to me and or I have an affinity towards. And so I find that when I'm socializing change, especially within the organization, I don't sell it as change.
Yeah.
I sell it as refinement or another
Very good.
point on the journey, making it current, forward-looking.
Great brands have done that well over
Right.
long periods of time.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you'll find, and there are tons of instances where you'll make a huge disruptive change that all research indicates is a good idea, and the masses reject it.
You can't always rely on equity of brand and say this is what we are, this is where we're going to be. You have to look at the service you're providing, let the brand envelop that service, listen to your audience, and go from there.
I also think the testament of the brand's equity, if you can't stretch it, I mean, that's the whole point, right? The stronger it is, the more you can stretch it.
Sure.
So you do have to test the limit. You have to push it. You always have to innovate. And you have to be relevant at all times and to all different people.
Right.
Your customers get older, you have new customers, you have younger customers. I mean, they're all different things you have to take into account. So you're always refining. It really is refining. You're not changing the pillars of the brand at all. You're just evolving.
It's about also maintaining currency. You don't want to feel old, you want to be fresh. And that doesn't mean you have to transform your brand. Change sometimes implies something's wrong. It may not be wrong, it's just tastes, interests have shifted. So you want to be more relevant. So what do you do to make the brand and position them in a way that you are relevant at that point in time, and also that you're looking ahead so you can anticipate trends and be on top of that.
Right.
I remember seeing a film that was shown to me by an advertising director at General Electric. And this film started off with a silent movie showing somebody leading some people through some appliances and showing them how they worked. And then it kind of raced ahead into like the 1950s. And Mr. and Mrs. Ronald Reagan were walking through a home showing just how their home, how many wonderful things, how great their life was because of the way that General Electric imprinted their home. And then it raced ahead to something that they had done in China just the week before. And that over a period from like 1917 to then, there was a drumbeat of a brand value that had thumped through all those years, but had at the same time changed and morphed and adapted itself and had been relevant in each generation. I think that's a good example that I would cite.
I think Apple's a great example.
Oh, yeah.
When I first experienced the Apple brand, it was as a student. And it was the brand for students, right? It was your desktop for
You
the
had a
student
Mac,
population.
right.
You were either a Mac or an Apple person, or you were a PC person. And if you were a student, you're more likely to be that. But I think that the underpinning of that student status was innovation and learning and development. And I think now they are one of their brand elements or positioning elements is innovation.
You take a look at somebody like Apple, right? Here's a good one. I don't look at that as a product company. I think the way they reinvented themselves actually was not the iPod, it was actually iTunes, right? It was the lifestyle. They started to put music into your running by putting it into your shoe and all that.
I think what you're buying is an attitude. You're buying a mission.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about that before, but for example, there are other brands that have been kind of in the dark and disappeared and didn't know what to do. For example, Adidas is another one who came from nowhere and just brought back what they were. Other brands like Levi's, for example, was kind of lost in space and suddenly went back to basics and said, no, we are the workers to bring back cities and bring back America. To the right moment to do it, but the why, again, is what nurtured their iconicness. So I think the iconic value of those brands is what made them big.
I have a similar amount of respect to a company like Old Spice with P&G, who's completely banished their tradition entirely with the Old Spice guy, what he knows, and the social efforts and the viral champions that they've become with that campaign. And initially they actually saw sales drop, and it makes a lot of sense because they really were alienating their core, and then they took a big risk.
Begs another interesting question, which is at what point or how can you tell what part of your history you need to leave behind?
I don't think you ever totally abandon it. I really don't think you completely abandon it. I think even in Old Spice's case, I mean, the bottle still looks the same, I think. I'm not buying it, but the bottle still looks the same. You don't completely abandon it. I think you disproportionately allocate your efforts from forward looking.
Yeah.
You just really focus forward, and you keep it there, and it's foundational, and it's helpful, and it's part of a lever that you pull at the right time when longevity and commitment to the marketplace and those things really matter. But you just proportionately focus forward.
CEOs, at least the ones I'm working with, are getting much more interested again in what's going on, right? My boss said to me, he said, look, I don't know whether you're going to like it or not, but I'm going to be involved in the creative, in the messaging and all that kind of stuff because this is simply too important to the future of the company.
Price competitiveness has become important, or putting pressure on companies. Where does equity kind of play in that, or in light of that reality?
That's when it's most important. I mean, you talked about Apple earlier. Apple's not cheap. You look at all the brands that are successful, it's because they've positioned themselves in having conversations in the marketplace that are not based on functionality or product attributes or all the rational stuff. It's about the emotional. It's about the experience. It's about the promise and the cool factor to it. So in a time when people are competing on price, it's not sustainable. You're not going to win because there's always going to be someone else that's going to be cheaper. But how you compete is about your brand resonates better, has more of an emotional connection, it's more meaningful, and that's how you're going to stay competitive.
Totally agree. Beyond functional and emotional benefits, it's now self-expressive, right? So you're using the brand to express who you are, and to take that away from someone is a lot harder than anything else. So like when you say, I'm an Apple person or IBM person, you're not really talking about the product, you're talking about who you are as a person. Are you a graphic guy? You're like that, a numbers person, that's really what you're saying. Nike versus, Adidas, same thing. So you're not going to, you can still keep your price point where it's at.
You're creating value, right? You're not communicating the product benefits anymore. You're actually establishing value to get that premium in price or to get the difference. Two sneakers, put them together, right? What's the difference between a Yukon Denali and an Escalade? They're exactly the same car, but one costs $25,000 more than the other. By the same company. Why? Because there's more branding done by Cadillac as a premium brand, right? To sort of create that. You could say the same thing, in technology markets of why the installed base is so important, because you can charge a premium because people don't get fired for buying your stuff, so you just naturally go in that direction. That's power. I mean, that's economic power. That's not, oh, that's cool, that's nice. That's real hard, cold, where when you're saying pricing is getting difficult, how do you combat it? That's how you combat it.